how underappreciated guys like Melo are. And I think we've almost became jaded by the type of player that is now considered a superstar, the best player in the league. And let me expand on that. So LeBron kind of ushered in, and I don't want to act like there weren't players who played this way before him, but it seems like he really ushered in a new era of basketball where coaches, where teams really leaned into having your superstar being an all around guy who really just you try and cover up as many holes as you can with your superstar essentially, right? And they carry a large burden on their backs, right? And I don't want to minimize the work that guys like LeBron, Russ at one point of his career, Russell Westbrook, James Harden, Luka Doncic currently, Nikola Jokic now, Giannis Antetokounmpo, guys with just heavy usage rates who, for lack of a better term, um, are there to kind of just cover the flaws of their team and their team makeup, if that makes sense. And these guys are all great. These guys are all exceptional. Everybody I named is an all timer. And there's more guys who play similarly to that I just can't think of off the top of my head. But because these guys have such eye popping stats when you look at the stat sheets 25, 10, and 9, Luka averaged like 33, 9, and 9 last season. Joker's averaging a triple double this season. Russ averaged a triple double 4 seasons. James Harden was averaging like 30, with like 8 assists and 6 boards. You know what I'm saying? These are just such eye popping and wow numbers that we begin to discredit and we become jaded by that so that we don't give enough credence to guys like Carmelo, to guys, honestly, like Kobe Bryant, to guys currently Anthony Edwards, SGA, who don't have the same statistical presence but if you watch the games, are still as impactful of players. And I think that's what gets missed in all of this. And this is why I wanted to have this segment today because it's very easy to look at a stat sheet without watching the game and saying, this guy's better than this guy. But I think what goes missed when you're talking about these stat sheet stuffers versus, let's say, a more traditional guy who, regardless of if he's a star or not, he plays a role within the team, right? If you look back at Carmelo, Carmelo's role was to be a scorer on his team, right? He had great point guards that he played with for most of his career, and Chauncey Billups, Allen Iverson, who handled the rock more than he did. You know what I'm saying? So he didn't have to be the facilitator, and honestly, I think his teams wouldn't have been as good if he tried to take on that role because it in turn minimizes what these other guys are doing. And that's the point that I really want to get to today, right? Because yes, on the surface, when you're just looking at stats, one stat line can look better than the other. But we have a hard time contextualizing why these stats are the way that they are and what this means for a team. Because the reality is, there are both pros and cons to each play style of a superstar, right? The superstar that is a do it all guy who averages the near triple double, who has the very high usage rate, who's bringing the ball up, initiating the offense, plus scoring 30, plus rebounding, plus assisting. There's a lot of pros to that, right? And I would say the pros are if you were full of a team of like specialists, right? It does what I said earlier, right? It covers up a lot of their flaws. So a shooter who is not a great shot creator, right? You create shots for them. It takes the dribbling aspect out of their hands. It allows them just to be, a pocket shooter, right? Or a spot up shooter where they can just catch the ball, shoot, not have to think about anything else, right? If you have a guy who, like Giannis, for example, who great offense, don't get me wrong, but if you're weak on the defensive end of the floor, he can cover up a lot of mistakes defensively because he's 6'10", super athletic, long, rangy guy, and he could be in a lot of places at once, right? So if you have guys who could score the ball really well but struggle on the defensive end of the floor, Giannis covers up a lot of those mistakes. You know what I'm saying? And that is true, right? And we've seen evidence of that when LeBron had a crazy run to the finals in 2007 versus San Antonio. James Harden almost beating the Warriors in 2000. Was it 19, taking them to 7 games? You know what I'm saying? So we've seen evidence that, you can maximize a certain level of player with that do it all play style and go pretty far. But on the flip side of that, we've also seen just as many instances where that play style can be very limiting to other kinds of players, if that makes sense. You know what I'm saying? So when I look at, LeBron again and the production he got out of guys like Kevin Love, guys like Chris Bosh, who were a different caliber of player than what I talked about prior, right? They're not the specialist who can only do one thing. They can do a lot of things well, but because, a guy like LeBron plays in a specific way, it makes it tough for them to maximize their talents as well, right? And you could say the same about James Harden when, he was playing with Dwight Howard, or even Chris Paul for an extent, or Russell Westbrook rather, when they had their year together. And the same can be said for Russell Westbrook and other guys. You know what I'm saying? So there's pros and cons to this. And to me, right, just as kind of an overarching theme, what I've noticed is for the do it all guys, the guys who are jack of all trades, if you will, who are stat sheet stuffers, they are great at lifting up lower caliber players. You know what I'm saying? Guys who are specialists, guys who don't have much range in their ability, but they also are more limiting to guys who are more talented. You know what I'm saying? And I could point to multiple different scenarios where this is true, but that just tends to be the trade-off. And that's important to understand. I'm not saying one's better than the other. I'm just saying there are trade-offs to both styles of play. And now when we shift over to the more traditional style of play, Carmelo Anthony's, the Anthony Edwards, the Kobe Bryant's, the guys who play a role within their team's offense and aren't the team's offense, as a lot of those other guys are. And, don't get me wrong, some of these guys have done both at different parts of their careers, but most commonly, right, this is what they are. They play their role, they play their position. You know what I'm saying? So what I've noticed is these guys have a harder time maximizing the lower level guys. You know what I'm saying? So if you're Carmelo or if you're Kobe from, 2005, 2006, you're scraping by trying to get to the playoffs with, a team that wasn't very good. That was the Kwame Brown era, the Smush Parker era. And the same can be said at different points of Carmelo's career. This will probably be true for Anthony Edwards. It was true for Anthony Edwards, initially, right, when they weren't making the playoffs, and later they've gotten better. And SGA, all these guys, right, they're going to have moments like this because their play style just they don't cover all the holes, right? They'd rather play a role within the team and allow other guys to do other things. And what I've noticed, and the reason I've worded it like this and bring it up like this is because on the flip side to that, it seems like these types of players can also maximize their opportunities when they have more talent. So if I'm looking at Kobe, as soon as he got Pau Gasol, talent maximized. Pau Gasol's potential, his talent maximized, right? The team as a whole with Kobe Bryant as their leader maximized, right? Carmelo Anthony, when they traded for Chauncey Billups, and now you have a veteran, high-level leader, Hall of Fame point guard, plus you got Nene, plus you got Kenyon Martin, J.R. Smith coming off the bench, just a really good roster. Maximized, right? They ended up losing to those Lakers teams, right? Because Kobe is just who Kobe is, right? Top 5 guy of all time in my eyes. But right, Carmelo, and Chauncey Billups, they were able to get the most out of those guys. And I think the reason being, when you look at it from a technical standpoint, is because when you play a role in an offense rather than being the offense, it allows other guys to be great as well. So Chauncey Billups can still be the leader, can still be the point guard. We're not taking the ball out of his hands, right? Whereas if he was playing with James Harden, if he was playing with LeBron, that looks a little bit different. Now you have Chauncey Billups trying to be a scorer when that's not necessarily, he can score the ball, don't get me wrong, but that's not necessarily where he thrives, right? He wants to be a playmaker. You know what I'm saying? And you can go down the list, and this seems to be true, right? And I think a guy like Chris Bosh would have thrived with Kobe. A guy like Kevin Love would have thrived with Kobe, would have thrived with Carmelo, would thrive with Anthony Edwards, similar to how Karl Anthony Towns did, because they're able to be the prominent scorer, and then here's your opportunity. You know what I'm saying? So I'm going to score the ball in my spots, but you still have the opportunity now to go make plays because I'm not dictating the offense for the entirety of when I'm on the floor. So that's just kind of how I feel about things. And I think, we get lost in this idea of, looking at the stat sheet and letting the stat sheet determine what's better. But to be honest with you, I think there's pros and cons to each approach. And I personally would say, just from what I've seen, guys who are the stat sheet stuffers, who are the do-it-all players, can raise the floor better than a more traditional style player can. But the traditional guy can raise your ceiling higher than the stat sheet stuffer can. So let me know if that makes sense. But I really wanted to do my best to articulate that point because I think it's something that gets lost in translation quite a bit. And I think it makes us lack appreciation for these guys because their stats don't look as eye-popping, right? It's not a triple-double every night. Sometimes it's 35, 4 and 6. Sometimes it's 25, 5 and 5. You know what I'm saying? It's consistent. But what that allows for is it allows for consistency in the team's production. Everybody's playing a part, right? We're not taking playmaking opportunities away from the point guard, right? We're not taking post-ups away from the big. You know what I'm saying? We're not taking shots away from the shooting guard. Everybody can play their role and do their thing. And if they're talented enough, right, they can maximize that role. So I think we got to start considering that when we're rating these guys on an all-time scale or just rating these guys in general, because the reality is everything has pros and cons.